Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank everybody who has shown up today. This is an important mental health panel about how we can best manage the mental health of our young adults and our growing teens, our emerging leaders, teens and young adults in college and emerging out of high school. This is an important conversation in light of COVID-19, social unrest, academic uncertainty, and just overall the overall like tenor of 2020 so far. It's been a community and a global stress on our mental health. And I think listening to these four panelists and kind of absorbing from their expertise, it will benefit not just our scholars, not just parents and teachers, but also people who work in the community and all of us ourselves. So I'd like to introduce myself as David Chappelle. I'm the Director of Development and Communications at Pursue Scholars. Pursue Scholars, if you don't know, is an organization that holistically supports emerging urban leaders here in Chicago through higher education in the hopes that through supporting them to be leaders throughout college, they come back to Chicago and serve us as leaders here. So we will go ahead and with the introductions real quick. Make sure you all have your sound on mute, especially if you're not a panelist. There will be time. If you want to submit your questions to the Q&A, just submit them to the chat room, and they will be compiled for me on a separate sheet for me to ask questions for the last 30 minutes. Okay. And I want to take this time to thank our sponsor, Sinai Hospital System. They were generous in sponsoring this event, and hopefully they will be sponsoring us for the events to come for mental health. We plan on doing these every quarter on different topics that come up in our society. So as for Sinai being our sponsor, our first one, it really gives us a lot of momentum to keep putting these things on. Okay, so I just want to thank them. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I'm going to introduce the panelists and have them each speak about what they do in mental health and how they make an impact on young people. Okay, so first off, I'd like to introduce Christina Fontanelli. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, my name is Christina and I am the CEO and founder of Fontanelli Art. We are a mental health and creative wellness company. I am an artist first and foremost, but I specialize in art therapy and dance movement therapy. We go around the city and go to underserved communities, and we provide movement workshops, experiences, in places where art and movement may not be accessible. I am also the author of Aligning Your Inner Self Meditation Journal. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Christina. Next up is Osiris Ordaz. Can you let us know who you are?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Osiris Ordaz. I recently graduated from Adler University, getting my master's in art therapy and counseling. Just finished a internship at North Park University, which is in Chicago. I was the art therapist and counselor there. Currently working on applying for my licensure, and getting a job in the field. Just opened up my art business. And so with that, I really just want to be able to integrate what I'm learning, in mental health counseling and be able to have representation in art for people of color. So.
Thank you, Osiris. Now, Osiris and Christina, could you please put the links to your businesses in the chat room so people can look those up as we continue to talk? And the same for you, Greg and John, as well, when we get to you, okay? So next up is John Choi. Could you please introduce yourself? Let us know what you're all about.
Hi, everyone. I'm John. I'm a licensed therapist. I work with Spring Tree Counseling. It's a group practice in Evanston and Chicago. I usually focus on trauma, depression, and grief. And I have a special interest in kind of the intersection between faith and psychology. And the kind of college age group and young adults is one of my groups that I like to work with.
Thank you, John. Once again, last but not least, is Greg Stoshko. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. How's everybody doing? I'm Greg Stoshko. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm the program manager of the Under the Rainbow program at Mount Sinai Hospital, which is located in near Douglas Park on the west side of Chicago. Our program, the Under the Rainbow Clinic, is essentially a community mental health clinic. It just happens to be located within the hospital. And we work with kids and families from about age 3 up to about 21 or so. And our primary focus is providing services here in the clinic, individual, family, group therapy, as well as medication management, with an emphasis or a specialty in complex trauma. We have a couple other kind of programs that are part of our clinic that are a little bit more community-based or prevention-based. We have a peer mentoring program. We do some school-based intervention work as well, in addition to providing trainings in the community to various stakeholders, churches, social service organizations, families, to learn about mental health and particularly about trauma and the impact of trauma on people. So that's me.
Okay, thank you, Greg. One last reminder, your Q&A questions will be read fairly pretty much in order. The questions that we don't get to during the Q&A we will be emailing those out to the panelists for them to answer, and then we will be following up with them. So go ahead and submit your questions as we go along. We'll have 4 rounds of questions during the panel. The first round is on COVID-19. The second round is on social unrest. The third round is on Black Lives Matter. And the fourth round of questioning is on education and how education has been impacted during this particular time of our lives. So let's go ahead and get going. So the first question goes to Greg. So if everybody's ready, let's go. COVID-19 unveiled more than just health disparities, but also economic disparities. How do you suggest that young adults from underserved communities manage the difficulties of dealing with the global pandemic, given a lack of financial resources to effectively shelter in place like their more affluent peers?
That's a tough one to start with, David. That's no, I appreciate the question. There's so much obviously about our world that has changed and has been impacted in the last several months, and the things that we're seeing in the families in our community. Our clinic primarily serves in families in the Little Village, Pilsen, North Lawndale community, but all over the city due to some of the lack of mental health services. But the impact that we're seeing in communities of color in the city and across the country, I think really is illuminating some of those systemic problems and issues related to systemic oppression that communities have faced, the impact of segregation on communities that we serve. And so these are things that many of us have known for a long time, right? These are things that in my field that we've known about in social work and all, across disciplines, that we've kind of known that these things were real and that they were impacting people. And now I feel like in some ways that recognition of those systemic forces that continue to create negative outcomes in some communities, especially primarily communities of color and lower resource communities in the city, is starting to become part of a broader dialogue, which I think is positive. But what you mentioned, right, the impact of the kind of economic impact, right, the economic stressors that come with the people's experience of the COVID pandemic is an additional burden that many families and many individuals are experiencing, an additional burden to be able to kind of cope with the limitations, to cope with the loss of resources, loss of jobs, and it just compounds some of those stressors that people were already experiencing, and then on top of it we have this kind of collective trauma, as somebody mentioned a little bit, that word a little bit earlier, this collective trauma that we're experiencing. So yes, I mean, that definitely kind of enhances the mental health consequences, the mental health burden of dealing with the collective trauma and having to also deal with some of those inequities that were present before COVID. So I think part of me is I'm kind of an optimistic person, but by nature. But I think part of me is optimistic that some of these things that we've been talking about for a long time in field of psychology or mental health are starting to enter into a national conversation a little bit more, and we're starting to identify some of these systemic issues that are really at the root. And so when we over focus, and I think I'm sure we'll talk about this as we get into some of the other questions talking a little bit more about some of the civil unrest and some of the protest movements and things. But when we detract from those systemic causes and hyper focus in on some of the smaller things, we're really doing a disservice in not kind of seeing what's at the root of these things. So those economic disparities existed before COVID, right? And it unfortunately takes something like a global pandemic to really bring that to people's attention and hopefully again kind of lead to more sustained focus and sustainable outcomes in addressing those things. I would like to believe that that's where we're headed. I don't know, but it's something that I, for one, will keep talking about, and that people who believe those things as well will keep talking about. So I'm not sure if there's other parts of the question that that I didn't answer or that you want me to speak more on. David?
No, that was fine. That was great. You definitely painted a picture of how Under the Rainbow and how Sinai, and even how the practitioners are realizing that there is more of a dialogue around these things that you all have already known. And I think hearing from a practitioner that the greater community is now talking about the things that you all have been fighting for decades is a good sign.
Yeah.
And like you said, I know that the social unrest kind of detracted from some of the health disparity conversation, some of the economic disparity conversation, and went more to police brutality. But I think now that we're kind of settling down, kind of not so much in Chicago, but now that we're kind of settling down from those things, we do have a chance to kind of look back and reflect upon all of the things we've been going through as far as disparities in our community over the past 5 to 6 months. Like,
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and just real quick, I'll just add to that. I think we've seen some wonderful kind of local and hyper local responses to in communities to help the residents of those communities for mutual aid organizations that have popped up overnight, food banks, a lot of wonderful financial, economic food resources for communities. And then, we just kind of do our best as a community mental health organization to connect with those resources, to be able to, to kind of amass a list and a network of those resources to help our families who are struggling with those really primal needs, where yes, their mental health and their well-being may be impacted by this, but the primary need really is food, or is money, is a job, those things. So being able to kind of partner with some of those community organizations has always been something that has been at the root of our work, to be able to kind of complement the work that we're doing around people's mental well-being, with some of those really necessary resources that are just kind of that are there, and those needs will continue to be there. So.
And that brings up a good point. I would love it if I could follow up with you all, as letting all the guests know that I will try to compile a resource list from each of our panelists, so we can share that with our guests post panel. Okay. So going on to question 2. So this is for Osiris. The transition to online learning and working from home was difficult for most young people. Please describe some of the challenges your clients had in suddenly leaving campus life and having to manage their schooling while at home.
Yeah, that seems like such a long time ago. But yeah, I mean, like you said, suddenly, right? So it was an unplanned change. And change in itself is very stressful, and compounded by the uncertainty and having it just be, uprooted. College students are uprooted from their college life, their college dorms, from a place where they have their routines, their structure, resources, their social life. You create a whole new life in this bubble, and then having them go back to home is just, when it's not planned, is very stressful. And so we saw an influx of feelings of just being overwhelmed, first and foremost. A lot of students went back to homes that were not necessarily the greatest home environment. Some students went back to places where, maybe they have several generations living with them. And so they have additional responsibilities as one of the oldest in the household to provide care for their younger siblings, provide care for elders, or just being a caregiver in general, while balancing that unplanned change of coming into that virtual life, right, of college life. And so we saw a lot of influx in anxiety and depression because the standards that you have at college for yourself were not being met at home. And so when your standards are here and you're kind of performing over here, your self-esteem goes down and sometimes anxiety and depression go up. And so working individually with my students, specifically my clients, to have a plan, right? Like, how are we going to maybe lower our standards or up our productivity? So depending on where they're at, how much responsibility they have at home, the resources that they have, and what we could provide for them as a school, we were able to kind of individualize that goal setting of, okay, let's see how we can build a routine for you that mirrors and reflects the one that you had at college. It might not look, actually, it won't look anything like college life, but at least we can kind of have that mirror effect, right? Of being able to say, okay, I woke up at this time on this day, like my Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes were from this to this. And, you know, having that structure for everyone, it kind of varied. Having maybe a looser structure worked for some people, and for others, it was more of a daily hour-to-hour plan. But yeah, a lot of my students really struggled with that motivation of like, well, I'm not accomplishing as much, I'm not doing as much. We know a lot of our students are overachievers and are in so many different, not only coursework and taking on that burden of academic life, but they're in clubs and extracurriculars and sports. And so that being stripped away from them, how can we provide an environment for them at home safely for their physical and emotional health? How can we mirror that at their house? And it was great because I was able to kind of, you know, see the layout of their house, what we were working with, and being able to kind of, you know, individualize that plan to them. So although at the beginning there was a lot of stress surrounding, you know, how I'm going to get everything done, I don't have peace and quiet. Like, I had some students working from their bathroom because there was no other place where they can sit down and just focus on their schoolwork. So it was a very practical response to then being able to, after working with them practically on settling a routine, it was a lot of working with them to unpack, right, all of that, those feelings, unpack the events that they had to go through, transitioning from college life to virtual life. And yeah, that was what my office was there for, to have, you know, that space to unpack and organize our emotions, to be able to kind of sit with them, you know, have tea with our emotions. I like to say, just get to know them. Yeah, that's really what we saw an influx of during that change, which I know a lot of students are now adapted to virtual life, but there still are struggles. So students, if you want to give, you know, some, or you want to ask some questions about how to transition from like high school to college virtual life, I'd love to speak on that too.
Excellent. If you don't mind, I would love it if you would be a resource for some of our Pursue scholars. If they needed you to reach out to you for goal setting or like managing healthy expectations, I would love it if you could be a resource to them, because I know a lot of them are listening and probably are thinking like, yeah, I was dealing with those same things as well, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
okay,
of course, of course, definitely.
Oh, thank you so much. So the third question is for John. So. Communities of color have been ravaged by the pandemic. Many of our students face direct results of COVID-19 saw the results of COVID-19 amongst their families and friends. What are some tools you have given young people to deal with the anxiety and stress of living through a pandemic that so directly impacts them, their families, and their loved ones?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So one of the first things that I do when helping you know, clients deal with stress and anxiety is I kind of walk them through psychoeducation. So there's like two models that I found really helpful for helping people understand like how to address stress, how to address trauma. And so one of them, it comes from like trauma literature, is called kind of like finding your window of tolerance. And so what that means is kind of, it describes our nervous system, and we're resilient, creatures. We're able to handle a lot of stress, and we kind of like ebb and flow, finding like rest and ability to kind of tackle, whatever challenges comes our way. But there comes a point where you either become hyper aroused or hypo aroused. And for my clients, I try to find those limits and those thresholds. So what is that window? What is that range that they have? And I think a word that has been thrown around today is like collective trauma. I think everyone's window of tolerance is much narrower right now. It's a lot of us are kind of running on high, which is like hyper aroused. We're kind of in a state of panic or kind of emotionally flooded. We might be hyper vigilant, or we might be hypo aroused. We might be depressed, kind of always chronically tired, having like poor digestion. So yeah, I kind of walk through the client, trying to help them identify when they kind of become dysregulated, when they become out of the kind of zone, so to speak, and try to widen that zone. Try to make it so that they're not so anxious or so depressed, kind of those two polarities. And I think,
go ahead.
yeah, I think, yeah, like first step after psychoeducation is kind of, you gotta like name it to tame it. A very simple, like a popular one is like emotionally checking in. Like, are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? It's kind of like this HALT, stands for HALT. But yeah, were you saying something?
I was gonna say, what are some strategies you give to people who kind of fluctuate between both? Because I know as a young person, when I was younger, and even still in my younger or middle age, there are times where I will have a day of hyper and I will have a day of hypo. Do you suggest we try to find a balance between the two, or stay in an even keel? What is the strategy there? Like, you know what I mean?
Right. So one thing I try to identify is like the triggers. So is it like some people get hyper aroused, for example, during the work day. And so you would need to kind of, orient towards that kind of youth breath work, or kind of some self-soothing techniques, some grounding techniques, something that can kind of help you, your nervous system kind of calm down a little bit, kind of ease, kind of settle down. And other times, like for example, like weekends, sometimes people during the weekend get really low actually, kind of get hypo aroused. So identifying that, and finding ways to kind of tackle the immobilization. So it could be doing something really small, like personal hygiene, doing the laundry, going for a walk. So yeah, the idea is to stay within your zone, not go too low, not go too high, and notice when you're kind of reaching the upper or lower limits.
Excellent. That gave me some extra clarity. Hopefully that helps some of our guests as well. So we're moving on to the round 2 questions. So round 2 questions are on social unrest. Round 3 will be more specifically tailored to Black Lives Matter, but this is a general commentary about social unrest for round 2. Okay, so we will start round 2 off with Christina. So for Christina, the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery sparked a firestorm of anger and unrest this summer. What are some creative solutions to releasing tension that you have used with some of your clients?
I would say first recognizing what was it that came up for them. I believe that everyone had a different individualized response to what took place, but also the media and the expectation and how people just told the story over and over. And so I think first is finding a person's own voice and their own emotions, whether they have the words to express them or not, but creating a space to say, you know, I was impacted in this way. I think that also being able to use music as a way to correlation to find words to express yourself. I know that there were a lot of artists, including like Beyonce, Kendrick Lamar, that were able to like bring back their music and say, this is what we are trying to demonstrate in a creative way. We're trying to say we are not heard, we are not being validated, we are being murdered. And those are very, very heavy things, but they are the reality of the world that we live in today. And I think a lot of people took on the weight of that, of feeling a sense of like, I have to solve this, I have to find the solution. And everyone has their own time and place to be able to explore that. So with a lot of my clients, especially working with youth, in particular, middle school, high school, and college, a lot of them were struggling. And so we were able to come up with just small creative activities. And first would be to have a journal, a very small portable one, for the day. In this journal, I would encourage those who struggled with anger, who struggled with confusion, to be able to have a container to get those emotions out and into something else outside of themselves. And then closing it and walking away from it. So not feeling like I have to process this now, or I have to figure out where this is coming from. Just being able to say, this is how I feel, this is a safe space, and I can go back to that when I feel like it. Another creative outlet would obviously be painting, like painting behind me, or finding a way to use digital art, drawing, poetry. What are some ways that are nonverbal in which they can begin to access words that may resonate with them? And one of the last things that I recommended was sticky notes. I love sticky notes. And I believe that everyone in their house should have a wall of affirmations, right? Those that words that they can identify as like who they are. They are strong, they're capable, they are compassionate, they are a warrior, they are Black, they are Latino, maybe they're Afro-Latino. Whatever words that they would use that can really uplift them and remind them of their core values and morals. And to have that space where if they are feeling confused or they are feeling low, they can go back and say, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. This is what I want. But it starts with recognizing that we can't do any work externally until we recognize the emotions that come up for us internally.
Excellent, excellent. So I can personally attest to like the benefits of journaling. I suffer from a mental illness, and when I first got diagnosed, I started journaling, and it was one of the things that really helped to calm me down, and it helped to be able to at the end of each day reflect and pour out things that you don't really have a chance to even say to yourself, because you don't sit and have a full conversation with yourself normally in your own brain. But if you can type things out and really get things on paper, it allows you to kind of focus in on the things that you've learned that day and the things you're actually going through in that moment. And I also agree that art, music, writing. So I've been writing a lot lately too, so that's been very therapeutic as well. So those things help. And sticky notes, I'm not a big sticky note person, but I think those things can definitely help. A lot of people utilize sticky notes effectively. So if that is something that you use, I suggest that you, as young people, utilize sticky notes around your dorm room, around your apartment, around your house, to be able to help remind you of things that'll keep you in a positive state. So I appreciate that, Christina. Thank you.
Absolutely.
So this is just question number 2 on round 2. This is for the CDs, okay? So college campuses may have been closed, but the college spirit of protest did not wane. How did you support your students' mental health through supporting their chosen methods of protesting?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Christina said, I personally utilize that with my students, which is great that you touched on, a lot of journaling and being able to take those jumbled thoughts and feelings that we have towards an event, any event really, but specifically, right, the political and racial unrest that's happening right now and has been happening. But being able to kind of, take it and put it somewhere where you can see it visually. Some of my students decided, I'm going to go out to protest. And so we kind of made a plan. I'm big on plan, right? Being able to plan out how are you going to process that afterward? Whether that be a mental health day after the protest or before the protest, making sure that the priority is their safety first and foremost, but not only their physical safety, but their emotional safety. So are they in a place where they can take that on to go out there and do that, or is it better for them to stay at home and come up with ways which they feel like they are making a difference through, virtual and talking to family members, talking to friends, and engaging in those tough conversations. One of the things that I like to do with my students, which is a little like what Christina offered about the journaling, I call them brain dumps. And so making any sort of like shape. Some of my students like to make clouds, like thought clouds. And the point is just to get it down. So I encourage them to do like bullet points if they don't have time to, journal for like 10 minutes. Just take 2 to 3 minutes and just dump whatever is on your brain onto a piece of paper, or doodle from some of my more artistic students. But the point is to just kind of get it out. Another one that was very popular with my students was blackout poetry. Yeah, blackout poetry is the name, where you kind of take any piece of paper. It can be like a magazine. It can be a book that you don't use, those textbooks that you can sell back. And you kind of just look for words that resonate with you, and just black out everything else, so that word is a standalone for the emotions that you're feeling at the moment. Maybe you can't take, or you can't articulate what is happening inside of you, but someone else has the words, kind of like the music thing that Christina was talking about. So those are 2 things that I really like to encourage my students to do, because as college students, sometimes they don't have the time, sometimes they don't have the energy, sometimes they don't have the motivation to do, big elaborate things outside of the space that I create for them and the time that they set aside for themselves. So just doing, the smaller things in your routine, however they choose to protest, however they choose to engage in what is happening in their world right now. And being able to cater that individually, I think, to the student and to the client, where they are, is very important.
That's excellent. So because I was talking to my sister about this when the protests first started happening. So I went on a neighborhood cleanup and I went on a protest downtown. And my sister didn't have a chance to because of work. She was too busy. So I think it was learning what was okay, how it was okay for you to express your sense of protest, but while doing it in a safe way, for not just safe for you physically, but safe for you psychologically as well. So I think you going over some of those things with your students and your clients is important, because everybody has that first impulse to like go out and have their torch and pitchfork and like go out there and be ready. But that's not always the most healthy way for a lot of us to go out there and express ourselves for protest. So I think breaking that down with these clients is important. I think each person taking the time to find that for themselves and give themselves a break if they don't adhere to what society tells them how they should protest is important too. So thank you for that, Osidi. I appreciate it. So third question is for Greg. As violent protests ravaged the west side of Chicago and recently in the Loop in recent days, your clients may have been uniquely impacted by the result of the destruction and a desire to take part in the unrest. What tools did you give them to help them manage their justifiable anger and stress over the unrest?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, Christina and Osiris hit on a lot of the things, that we do, I think, in our work, using expressive and creative means to support, individuals' expression of emotion and healing. But one thing I'll add to that, I think, this is something that's come up a lot, just reflecting on current events, with clients that I work with and my staff, the families that they work with. But it often, I think, feels for a lot of therapists, for sure, but even for clients, it sometimes feels like those are topics that maybe are not always appropriate for therapy, or that maybe like are not, and especially for therapists, right? So therapists, I think in a lot of ways are trained to, kind of not disclose things about their own beliefs, and to kind of it's hard. I'll just acknowledge, I think in the way that we're trained, it's hard sometimes to know how to approach those. Fortunately, I think we have some really good tools to use. So I'm a big fan of there's an approach in clinical psychology called critical psychology, which at the risk of, I'm trying not to get too technical, but I think it gives me a framework, and I think it gives a lot of my team a framework to really be able to dive into these conversations in a meaningful way, because the idea is that, in the field of mental health, we're really good at internalizing problems. So if you're depressed, that's a problem with you, right? So you're feeling depressed, you're feeling anxious. What can you do to change it? What can you do to get better, right? And that largely in the field of psychology, we haven't done a good job of understanding the impact of systemic, political, historical, and social forces, right, on people's mental health and well-being. And that often those historical, social, political factors have more impact on people's well-being than those those internal factors, or those like individualized factors, right? And so this framework really gives us that would say, like, not only like should we talk about these things, but we have to talk about these things, right? Because if we don't, it's like blaming the victim, right? So if somebody lives in a context where they've been deprived of resources and they suffer from, generations of, systemic oppression and poverty and lack of resources, and they feel a certain way, right? They feel depressed, they feel anxious. That if we turn that on them, that it's like blaming someone for factors that are outside of their control, right? But rather to say, no, there's, these are the factors, right? These are the things, this is the reason why that you might be feeling this way, or this is the reason why this might be impacting you in a certain way. And especially then, like, so, for me as a white man, right, like to be engaging in those conversations with my clients, like this approach would say it's even more important to engage in that conversation in dialogue in an honest way, because as a white person and a person in a position of power, that I am more likely to kind of perpetuate some of those forces, right, that continue oppression, right? So very similar to, like, in social work, there's like an anti-oppressive social work practice, and like very similar kind of ideas, right? But these are really helpful tools, I think, for therapists at this time. So a lot of the conversations I've been having with my clients about this is really just, kind of validating those feelings that they've had, right? And these are things that maybe they've felt for a long time, but are starting again to be put into more of a framework by Black Lives Matter movement, or just, other social movements that have kind of named these things, right? So people feel like, oh, I'm not crazy. This is a real thing. This has a real impact. It's not me. It's my context, or it's not me. It's these systemic forces. And so I think the combination of both of those things is really the most powerful thing that I can do to help the families that I work with. Having some really good resources and tools and skills, as Christina and Osiris mentioned, right? Like, how do you help people cope with that, right? Because you can't just, knowing the systemic impact doesn't necessarily make those feelings go away, right, immediately. It could lead to that, right? But we need to have a combination sometimes of those really, in the moment, techniques and tools and strategies to help people manage those feelings, but then also be able to say, it's not just about changing me, maybe it's about changing, working everyone, not just the client, right, but that the therapists and people who are in positions of power working to change those contexts, not just change the individuals who are suffering.
That is excellent. So you said a lot of key words that I get excited about. So I as a trained historian, I know I try to always place things in context. I try to always place things within the framework of the overall structure of what made that situation what it was. And I think having a therapeutic strategy that incorporates those things is so beneficial, especially to communities of color who have faced where a lot of our trauma is historical. It's been over centuries for almost every ethnicity and subgroup in this country, even for Caucasian groups, like as far as Italians and the Polish, and there's certain historical traumas even going back to Europe, going back to Africa, going back to Asia and South America. There's all these historical trends that they all coalesce here in this country in this big melting pot but those things still need to be acknowledged. Those things still need to be addressed, especially in a therapeutic sense when you're dealing with individuals. So I think having that kind of a framework is excellent, and I love that. I love that that's being used, and I appreciate that. So once again, I'll remind everybody that this is sponsored by Sinai Health Systems. And if any of these therapists you want to talk to on an individual basis, or maybe hire for some personal therapy, make sure you check out the comments for their contact information, so you can get in contact with them after the panel to have some follow-up questions with them individually, or to talk more about their practice, their practicing. Okay. So this is for our third round. This is for Black Lives Matter. The first question goes to John. So young people have a unique connection to this social unrest, as they feel as though the generations prior did not do enough to stand up for themselves. As movements like Black Lives Matter grow, how are you guiding your clients to effectively express themselves and stay active in social movements?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, kind of a little bit reiterating a little bit about what Greg was saying about kind of the roles and limitations of a therapist in terms of advocating for going one way politically, or thinking about what one's beliefs are. And but what I really enjoy about being a therapist in that way is that we often play a role that gives the client space and freedom to really find that out for themselves. So these young students, young people, they're really trying to figure out their identity and trying to understand their social context, understand what's going on in this world. And oftentimes, good intentions, people older than them, church people, their parents, they're usually telling them what to do, and or what to believe, or how to act, or how to respond. And as therapists, we kind of have this unique situation, space where they're able to feel how they feel about it. We're able to give them space to process on their own, form their own opinions. So in response to Black Lives Matter, I really enjoy kind of sitting with the clients in those moments, trying to process some of the rage, validating some of the anger, some of the hurt, also processing the trauma. Yeah, I think ways to express that it's been great with what Christina and Osiris mentioned. So kind of doing that inner work first, of kind of the disciplined reflection of finding those like core values, those like I am statements. This is who I am. This is what I believe. One of my professors kind of mentioned that like parental faith has to be personal faith, and personal faith has to be shared faith. There's this kind of order of kind of self-discovery and kind of coming into your own. And I think with social movements like this, this younger generation is like kind of coming into their own. And I usually first recommend that they find a mentor with the same worldview, same kind of beliefs that they can kind of plug into, to kind of help them on this journey of figuring it out, so to speak. And then I play the role of a therapist in giving them space to kind of experience how this is affecting them.
That is excellent. What I love about therapy is like how much it empowers me personally to make decisions that are beneficial for my life. And what therapists do so amazingly is like they will allow you to figure things out on your own, but they will slightly nudge you in ways that like to benefit you for yourself. So you can figure out the things that are unhealthy for yourself, rather than like having somebody, like you said, come in and telling them what to do, telling them what to say. It's about finding the strength to stand up for things that you believe in, and finding the strength to heal yourself from things mostly, rather than having to rely on other people to do it for you. And I think finding a mentor is an excellent idea. I hadn't even thought about that. I may need a mentor myself one day, so I think I do. So thank you so much, John. So this is question number 2, goes to Greg. So ethnic divisions are at a high pitch right now. With racial tension looming in the west side of Chicago, what methods have you used to help mend the divide between your clients as a group and as your clients individually?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it goes back to history, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
the same. It's similar to
Yeah.
my response and the things that I was talking about a minute ago. You know, Chicago has a long history of segregation, right, and continues to this day. And so, I don't know if people are familiar with Mount Sinai Hospital, where it's located. We're on the corner of Ogden and California. We're kind of on a really sharply divided and segregated, you know, on the border of two sharply divided and segregated communities, South Lawndale and North Lawndale, a Black community and a Latino community that in recent, you know, months has seen a lot of, you know, some real instances of racialized violence, but then also a lot of fear and anticipation and misinformation around you know, violence directed at residents of the community by by residents of the other community. So this is something that our families have been talking a lot about, the fear. In you know, a lot of so again, there's, you know, our kind of traditional therapeutic techniques that we use, right, that people have been talking about already, that we use to help mitigate some of that anxiety and fear that people have. But I think what has to also be a part of that, especially if you're thinking about it from a perspective like critical psychology, is that kind of fear that's stoked, you know, between two groups. It just serves to muddy the waters so that people don't see the underlying commonalities and the underlying systemic factors that are the same in both of those communities. So the things that have caused, you know, there to be disinvestment and disenfranchisement in North Lawndale are almost the same things that have happened in South Lawndale. So those two communities have a lot more in common. The fear and the pitting of those groups together only serves, you know, the people who are in positions of power and people who are, you know, serve to kind of benefit from that continued oppression, right? So I think, again, in the same way that helps people, it helps people understand their context better. People, you know, they weren't dropped into that, right? There isn't an inherent animosity between the Black and Latino community, but it was rather kind of created by these social forces to keep people fearful, to keep people disenfranchised, to keep people disengaged, and being able to touch on that in therapy. And again, this isn't to say that me as a therapist or my colleagues, that the goal is to kind of, you know, prescribe a certain way of seeing this, right, or a political stance or a political view. But I think some of these things that are historical have become politicized in a way that, again, kind of obfuscates, kind of blurs the you know, what's really underlying these things, and that those two communities have much more to gain by being more united or being more, you know, less fearful of one another. And so you know, a lot of it is, you know, is that we run two wonderful mentoring programs here in the clinic. And one is located in South Lawndale and one is located in North Lawndale, and we've had some great opportunities to have the youth mentors and the adult mentors to have dialogue, you know, across those two communities where they might live 2 miles from each other or less and have never set foot in each other's community, right? And to be able to open up those dialogues and you know, across those groups and across those experiences, to really just humanize each other and to really help you know, build that connection. It happens here in the clinic. You know, currently we're not running any groups because of the COVID situation, but our group therapy spaces are a wonderful space to do that as well, because of where we're situated in the city. We see clients from all over, many clients who would never maybe interact otherwise based on some neighborhood segregation, gang boundaries, safety issues, things like that. And so they're here and they're able to kind of have these kind of human experiences with each other and interact in those ways, is really powerful for kind of bridging some of those gaps.
Excellent. So what I'm hearing you say is that we need to pursue unity, right? So I just want to have a little plug and say that there is something coming from Pursuit Scholars, and I hope to instill some of that unity in these communities that are fighting each other, have been fighting each other for generations, and we're definitely going to be trying to instill some more unified cohesion amongst Chicago's neighborhoods and amongst each other to show that there is a common love and a common identity between all of us that we can share. So just stay tuned from Pursue Scholars, and there is something in the works coming from that, okay? But thank you so much, Greg, for that question, for that answer. I appreciate it so much. So Christina, this is the last question on Black Lives Matter section, and we have one more section to go. So Christina, art is an important method of expression for Black Lives Matter and similar social reformation groups, as you guys have probably seen with a lot of the art that's been done for murals and street art, things like that. How have you incorporated this medium of expression into the therapeutic methods you have employed since the unrest started? So this is more like how your traditional art therapy and like in music therapy, dance therapy, how have you restructured that specifically because of the unrest since the untimely passing of those young black people?
Yeah, so first I'd like to start with the framework. So I'm a certified clinical trauma professional. And I think one of the most important things that I bring into any of the service that I do, whether it's art therapy or dance therapy, is recognizing the type of trauma that we're facing. So we have those one-time incident traumas where those are like accidents, 9/11. We have the, I can't think of the name of it, but we have reoccurring trauma. So that's like abuse, being in a domestic violence relationship, emotional abuse, things like that. But then we also have something that is called racial trauma. So that is something that we are lived in and placed into without being exposed to anything in particular if you're a young child. But then as we see George Floyd, we begin to recognize how that has an impact on us. Racial trauma is very particular because your skin color is a trigger for other people and how they respond to you. And so it leads a group of people who are in the Black and the brown community to be hypervigilant, which is like going outside, constantly looking over your shoulder, constantly being followed in stores, just constantly feeling unsafe, whether it's in your own house or if it's in the public community. And so recognizing that that is the space that I'm trying to hold and understand that's the trauma that we're working with, being able to bring that. I've done a lot of more so movement therapy within the past couple months. So doing workshops with women, doing workshops with kids, doing workshops with those that identify as Black and brown community, and talking about how can we take our bodies back? Let's just start there. We are being told that we're this, that we're that, whether it's racial or if it's just, social media and society. You're not skinny enough, you're not pretty enough, your hair is not the right, you don't have the right things, you don't have the right car, you're not in the right place, not the right neighborhood. And so we're getting like a double infiltration of you're not enough. You don't have enough, you don't look enough, you're not capable. And so what does that do to us in the bodies that we live in and the self-thoughts that we have? 80% of our natural thoughts are negative. And so really being able to push past that and rewiring the thought process that we have, that we are embodying day to day. And so really bringing in specific music and enhancing the mind-body connection. And so it can be something as simple as, let's wiggle our fingers. So I'm going to invite you to do that with me. Wiggle your fingers with me. Now look at your fingers as you're wiggling them. Maybe push your hands out a little bit further and have a different perspective of it. Maybe rotate your wrists. Last thing I'll ask you to do, maybe just take your hands up and give yourself a morning stretch. Maybe lean from one side to the other, shaking out the shoulders, right? So something as simple as that. We tend to carry a lot of weight, tension, anxiety, stress in our neck and shoulders. And since the result of COVID, a lot of people have been in front of a computer or stagnant. And so taking in the racial, taking in the everyday, taking in COVID, the impact that it's having on the body. We don't look at our body enough. We don't spend time just recognizing the simple movement in joints. I can imagine some of you all maybe have not stretched in the past hour. So what that did and the blood flow and opening up and breathing, it's just like, oh man, yeah, this feels good. So really being able to bring in the movement of just self-awareness and the self-check-in. Our body is constantly communicating to us. And a lot of people are like, I'm not a mover, I'm not a dancer. And it's like, did you get out of bed today? Okay. Did you maybe make some coffee or reach for water? Okay. Can you blink? Okay. Is your heart beating? You are absolutely a mover. But we have that perspective of you have to be a dancer. And moving is just how you go to and from one activity to the next. And so really being able to help students in particular check in, like if you're feeling your back tensing up or you're feeling your thoughts drifting and you're having a hard time focusing, you probably need a movement break. Get up, walk around, get up, stretch, maybe do something else for 10 minutes and then come back to it. So really empowering people with the tools that are free and accessible, but it's like a muscle, and self-awareness takes time. And I think that is what is beginning to have the conversation of we are taking our body back one day at a time.
Thank you so much. I think what people get lost on sometimes when it comes to mental health is that your mental health and your physical body are so deeply connected. You can literally feel the pain of stress. You can literally feel the weight of anger in your body. It'll make you shiver sometimes. How many people have been so upset that they shiver? Like these things happen. You get so sad that you start to tear up and your whole body just feels this heavy. So I think finding the tools to reverse that on an individual basis, on a daily basis, reverse that 80% of negative thoughts to enhance our bodies to feel better about themselves is so important. So thank you, Christina. So this is round 4. We have 3 more questions left. So sweeties, these questions are on education, mostly higher education, but they could dip into high school as well. So just letting you know. So academic uncertainty has resulted in acute traumas and tremendous stress for many college students. What coping tools did you give to students who had to come to you for support? Now, you've already kind of answered this, so I understand if you kind of don't want to go over all of that over again. But because I asked you a specific question about schooling before, but like maybe you can follow up with some helpful tips you can give the students as they start to move off to college. So maybe like, well, how do they deal with some of the stressors that are going to be coming to them as they're about to leave? Because some of those people on this call are at Taylor or heading to Taylor soon. I don't know what the time frame is. So a lot of our current scholars are about to go off to college or maybe already be on campus. So like, how do they deal with the unique stressors that they're facing in this season today?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. So I think the number one most important thing that I can say and can advocate for very passionately and deeply is to connect to a counselor on campus. I know that Taylor has resources for counseling. I have a friend who works, I believe she's in the, I think it's like the international, some sort of like international connection. But I think that connecting to a counselor on campus is probably the most important thing that you can do. Not only because, you may need help, but because you're entering into a completely different environment, a completely different setting. Just a change in going from like Chicago to Taylor in itself, like geographical. I myself went to a college in Iowa in the middle of cornfields. So just the geographical change that can happen, the culture change, compounded by everything else that is happening right now. All those intersections, all those lanes just become intersected and you're in this like crossroads of like, there's so much happening, and being able to process that and being able to have a space for yourself where it's all about you. And that can be a little bit intimidating sometimes, but being able to carve out time for yourself might be the number one thing that you can do when transitioning from high school to college. The resources are free. And as many of the adults here know, that therapy outside of college is not free. I would love me some free therapy. But there's, some very amazing resources that your college can give you. And so I'd say tap into those resources, utilize them to the full extent, and ask for more. Always ask for more. If they can't provide you with the resources, they can connect you with resources that you are able to tap into. And so connecting with them is the most important thing. And then from there, kind of, it's an individual process. And so whatever that you are dealing with, whether, you have a family member affected with COVID, or if you yourself are dealing with that intersection of being a human in 2020, just in general, and what that means for you. So I'd say that's the number one thing. From there, I think that practical things, like keeping in touch with mentors that you have already is a very huge thing, to stay connected to friends that you already have in this setting right now here before college. If you're already in college and transitioning to maybe online completely or maybe hybrid classes, seeking out your support system and writing down what your support system is. So sometimes students can get overwhelmed, and in that moment of feeling overwhelmed, you don't remember that you have the support system. Maybe tacking up on the wall, right? Like I do with my students, a support web, and we write down all the things that you do to find relief in stressful situations. Some students like to read, listen to music, write, draw, doodle, or take a walk, breathe some fresh air, but write it all down, so that when in those moments you can look up and say, that's right, I have a sister, I have a mentor, I have this person on campus who I turn to when I'm feeling like this, and to help us kind of detach from that feeling and say, okay, this is what I need. And I have it right there listed, and I can point to what do I need? I need this, and be able to do that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now, Christina has a follow-up question, but I'm going to make a comment real quick. I think taking time daily for yourself is so important. And the way I do this, I'll give you guys a suggestion how I do it. I just recently started meditating somewhat frequently, but I've been doing yoga, like basically since I moved out here to California in January. I've been trying to implement more of a yoga routine. And I'll tell you what, like the very first, if you haven't done yoga in a while, or even your first time doing yoga, when you do it, like, and the way your muscles like feel, and like the way the blood is coursing through your veins after your first yoga session in a while is such a euphoric experience. So if you are not doing yoga, if you don't have space in your dorm room, do yoga. Try to find the community room somewhere and just you can even have it on your phone, pop it up against the wall. Go purchase like a $10 yoga mat, which is a lot of money for all the students I know, but maybe you can try to save up for it. Go get a yoga mat, and like I strongly suggest that you guys take part in yoga. It doesn't have to be a spiritual yoga. It doesn't have to be something that doesn't adhere to if you have Christian or Muslim values. But yoga definitely is something that I suggest taking part in, like for sure. So that's my recommendation. And Christina, go ahead and ask your follow-up question to those CDs.
Okay. I also do a shameless plug. So I am a yoga instructor as well, and I teach Christian yoga and hip hop yoga.
Yes.
And I think that a lot of people who have tried yoga, I know Lainey has taken one of my classes, there's like a little bit of resistance. And so recognizing that trauma lives in our body and it holds on, and it may restrict our movement and how we move into the world. So recognizing that something like yoga can begin that healing process as well. And so my follow-up question to you, Osiris, was, I know that a lot of the schools that I'm working with, they are not able to meet the demands of students who are returning back and asking for counseling, where there's already a wait list until November, just because of the influx of students now wanting to utilize those services. So I'm curious, how is your particular program being able to meet that need? Also, are they bringing on more people of color to meet the racial and social injustice needs as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at North Park, I know that last year we had 2 interns. The supervisor at that office is a Latina woman. I myself am Latina. And I know that for this year, they are bringing on, instead of 2, they are bringing 3 interns to meet the demands, not only of just the sheer number of students, but also because North Park is so diverse, they are bringing on diversity in the office setting. And we are connected to Arbor, which is right across the street from us. And when there is an influx of students at our offices, we do connect them to outside resources, which is why I say to students, even if your college can't help you on site, they can connect you with resources that you're able to connect with via like your insurance, and they're able to kind of be that caseworker and mediator between you and whatever office they're connecting with you to. And so you don't have to do the whole like adulting thing yourself. You can walk through it with a counselor who can also be your caseworker. They won't leave you high and dry. They will connect you with someone.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now we have 2 questions left. If you have not yet submitted a Q&A question, please submit one. I see that. Yeah, April just go ahead and said something. So we will try to get through these last 2 questions and answer as many Q&A as we can before 2:30. We will be ending promptly at 2:30, so I'm going to shut up real quick. But if you do submit your Q&A questions, we will be submitting them to all of the panelists for them to answer it, and we will email those out, okay? So if you want to put your email in the chat room, we can take that down. And if you want to submit your Q&A question, we will have the panelists answer the ones we don't get to and send those out, okay? So last 2 questions. So the second to last question goes to John. Imagine we're talking about education right now, okay? So with so many high school and college seniors missing out on graduation and other students having to extend time in school, COVID-19 has dramatically impacted the academic experience of thousands of Chicago students. How are you helping your clients through these crises? If you have no students who are going through these specific crises, what suggestions do you give to young people struggling through these experiences?
Gotcha. Yeah, of course, my initial, response is to sit with the client, do some grief work around kind of the loss of not having a graduation, or the loss of not having maybe their first year of college look like they wanted to, etc.
Yeah.
So doing some grief work. I'm also like strength-based, so I try to point out, the perseverance it took to get through college or high school, the how they overcame disadvantages and etc. But one thing I really lean on is there's a favorite quote of mine. It's from Viktor Frankl, and he is a psychotherapist during in 1900 or during Hitler, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he actually went through Auschwitz and all the concentration camps. And the quote is that if there's any meaning to life, then there must be a meaning to suffering. And I would want to walk alongside these clients to try to help them find in this crisis what meaning can be made of this time. A lot of what we kind of talked about today is like, this could be a chance for doing some inner work, or some ways to kind of, when you're always kind of doing homework, deadlines, classes, you kind of are, your mind's kind of, all over the place. This might be a season, kind of like a desert moment, kind of before your calling kind of a thing, where you identify what your passions are, what your skills are, and you can actually explore that, because now you have a little bit more time to do that. So yeah, I'm really big on kind of finding that meaning and in crisis. And I think there's post-traumatic growth. A lot of the times when we experience a crisis and we kind of go through it, there's some benefits. We learn things. There's some wisdom.
Excellent. Post-traumatic growth. Oh, I thought you were done. So you muted yourself. Are you still going?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, it's okay.
But yeah. So just try to tap into the meaning of it, and it kind of goes into easily into spirituality and kind of growing deeper there as well.
Definitely. But I just want to highlight post-traumatic growth. Like, wow, I need to put that, I need to frame that on my wall behind me right here. Like, post-traumatic growth. That is, I've never heard the phrase before. So I want to thank you for bringing that into my life. I'm going to use that frequently, not just for myself, but for others who go through traumatic experiences, and show like, hey, like you have a chance to grow through these traumatic things. You have a chance to grow through the things that may not have gone as well as you would have liked. So that's excellent. So one last question, and then we'll get to the Q&A. This is for Christina. As many students and young adults in the workforce are shifting all work online, there will inevitably be a technology burnout. How are you helping people deal with the stress of this barrage of virtual meetings and lectures? No offense to this virtual meeting, while still finding time to reconnect with nature and their inner selves.
Yes. So one of the key things that I've recommended is finding balance, um, and being able to like put time into your own calendar for yourself to check out and go outside and to do activities that are outside. And a lot of people are like, oh, I don't have time. I have meetings, I have homework. And really being able to put an emphasis on the importance of checking in, doing some movement, doing some breath, and doing something outside of the typical space, even if it's not going outside, but at least leaving the space in which you're doing these activities. And really being able to recognize that our technology has now blended in with our personal and professional, where before we went to a place to work, we went to a classroom, and now we're living in the house where we're working and going to class and checking emails and doing all of this. And so our boundaries are really, really mixed up right now. So some of the things that I recommend, simple ways, is having a morning routine and having a night routine that has nothing to do with technology. And so a morning routine can be like making tea, journaling for a few minutes, maybe listening to a song that you like, reading a book for 10 minutes, or maybe just dumping out some ideas or thoughts that you've had from a dream or the night before, and not utilizing technology. And at night, giving yourself a curfew. Something that I actually just started last week, I got like the Echo Dot. So in order for me to not sleep with my phone, I have my phone near me, I shut it down at night. And I have an alarm clock. Like, I'm going back old school. How can I still do what I need to do without using my phone? And really just recognizing that I'm not getting up in the middle of the night, I'm not checking my phone, I'm not getting overloaded with emails or things that I haven't done, but I sleep in a completely separate room of technology. And so that is one little way that you can begin to distance yourself. Something actively is what people are doing now, having their cameras on. So if you do need to do a Zoom or you need to do a call, preserve your energy. If you can, turn your camera off, mute yourself. If you're just gathering information, gather information, and really being able to have that distance of not always, putting up, showing up, having to do this and that, but finding those little key pockets throughout the day of where you're able to just like sit back and relax for a few minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have some questions. Let me see. Looks like we just have questions from Lainey, so that she sent to me. And this answer actually, it coincides exactly with what Lainey was asking. So I will leave it to anybody else if they want to add into this. But Lainey's first question is, how does screen time affect mental health? So she has 3 different separate questions. I'm going to just ask that first one first. So how does screen time affect mental health? And any of the 4 panelists can answer that. Buddy?
I can jump. I mean, feel free if somebody wants to jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Okay, I was just going to say, I'll just throw out a couple of things. I think there's a couple of ways that we know just being on our phone, right, like being on a device can affect our mental health, right? There's tons of research that shows the more people are on social media, the more likely they are to be depressed. I think that people compare, the tendency to kind of compare your life to other people's lives is a tough cycle and kind of trap to get in. And I think that we often, kind of see things that people are doing on social media and which may not necessarily represent exactly what their life is like, but it inevitably makes us compare that to our own lives. And so I think there's a lot of research about that. There's a lot of really good information out there about how kind of limiting some of that, and the tendency towards social comparison is negative for our mental health. But I think the real insidious part is exactly what Christina mentioned, like what it does to our bodies, what it does to our sleep-wake cycle, our circadian rhythm, the light, the light from the screens, how that affects our ability, if we don't set good routines for ourselves, if we don't, if we're on our phones at night, what that does to our brain and how that affects our ability to have a healthy sleep-wake cycle. There's it's a couple of different levels. I mean, it's just one of those things, like I'm not, I have my phone right here. Like I'm not, it's a blessing and a curse, right? There's so many wonderful things that come from it. And even in this time of disconnection and isolation due to COVID, right? Like there's social connection that people can have virtually. I'm not saying all of that is bad, but we just really have to think about, some of those more sneaky ways that our reliance on those devices and on technology like that really could impact us.
Thank you so much, Greg. Lainey has a follow-up question. She asked this question just right now, so I'll kind of read you her message. She has a habit of ignoring anger and frustration that comes from lost experiences and ambiguity. This deals with a lot of what we're talking about with the academic side of COVID-19, social unrest, and like the loss, like the FOMO, the things that we're missing out on, but these young people are missing out on from this shift in academia. How do you advise that she or any of the young people on this panel or in this chat? How do you suggest that they balance those? How do they balance ignoring the anger and frustration, but also like balancing that with like dealing with the loss of experience? You guys have any suggestions?
I can speak on that a little bit. So I'm right there with you. I just graduated, and I also felt very angry and sad that, we couldn't have a graduation. I think that FOMO is peak when we see others maybe not engaging in safe activities, and we ourselves are trying to be safe and not putting ourselves at risk and our loved ones at risk. But I think more than anything is not to ignore those emotions. I think that it's a buildup, right? When we ignore it, it kind of builds on itself to the point where sometimes we can explode in different ways, or it can lead to it can just lead to more difficulties in addressing it later on. So I think that reaching out to others who are also experiencing what you're experiencing right now, that loss of completing that ritual, right? It's like a closing ceremony of a chapter in your life. But I suggest doing something on your own to celebrate that, to celebrate where you are right now, what you have done. I know that for myself, giving an example, I went through kind of like very all of the papers that I did and everything, and kind of just looked back and reflected on the growth that I have done in these past 2 years. And I did it with some classmates, and we just kind of talked about where we are now, what our hopes for the future are, and what school has helped us with, right? So being able to engage safely, like virtually or on the phone, or any way that you're comfortable doing with others, and being able to express that rage and frustration in however you can. Sometimes it's just screaming and having a tantrum into a pillow. Sometimes it can be journaling. Sometimes it can be art. But whatever it is, it's that release of emotion and being able to say, this is my emotion, and that is okay, because it is okay that you are feeling rage. It is okay that you are feeling sad. However you are responding to whatever is happening in your life right now is okay. And just accepting that how you're feeling right now is justified, and you are valid in feeling that way, and being able to share that with others who are also feeling that way.
Yeah, I think relying on community during this time is critically important, because it's not. I think our anger and our frustration is not isolated. So I think being able to connect with others and share that experience with them, and like being able to pour your hearts into each other is an effective way to help cope with these issues. So I'll combine these last two questions into one. You guys you feel free to answer both parts of them, or just one part. If you guys have if any of you four panelists have any suggestions. So how would you describe the right way to rest / healthy way to rest? So the right way to rest or healthy way to rest, and what would you describe as a good morning routine? And framing these putting these in the framework of college students would be excellent. So what is the right / proper way to rest? And then to juxtapose that, what's a good way to wake up in the morning to kind of start your day off? Anybody can answer. This is the last question, so we'll have about 5 minutes for this, and we'll wrap it up.
I can speak to that. I find very, very, very deep value in morning routines and night routines. So I can just share mine as an example, and I think that you can begin to formulate and try certain things to make it your own, because there's no right way or wrong way. You just have to find out what works for you. I remember when I was in college, I never really woke up early enough in time. Like I would just wake up like 10 minutes before class, 20 minutes before class. So I had that constant like stress and anxiety as a low level emotion. So I would recommend waking up where you can have at least 1 hour to yourself, which may mean that you may need to go to sleep earlier. But to be able to wake up, the first thing I do, and I practice, very deeply in my faith, I identify as Christian. I wake up and I open with prayer. I just thank God through gratitude. I'm grateful for my body. I'm grateful for breath. I'm grateful that I was safe. I'm grateful for the home, running water, light, things like this. So getting your mind in that framework of like, today is a gift because someone did not wake up today. Someone did not make it. So really being able to shift that perspective. From there, I make some tea. Then I sit down and I journal for a few minutes. There's this book that I'm reading called High Performance Habits by someone named Brendan. So really understanding like, what are my habits? What are things that I'm doing that I can do better to maximize my time? And I just read about 2 to 3 pages, nothing really overwhelming. And then I write a list of affirmations, whether I believe them or not, I write them down. I am strong. I am capable. I am focused. I'm a good student. I am learning. I'm growing, whatever may feel genuine and authentic to you. And then I have just like a sheet of paper that is like kind of what I say to myself. I call it like my life purpose. Today is August such and such on this day. I am a beautiful woman who is intelligent and a therapist and help others. And I just write all the things that I value and all the things that I want to accomplish. I want to be a light to others. I want to be able to point to others. I will pay attention to my body. Just kind of like a script to help you start the day, to help you remember that every day is a gift. Every day has intention. You're not here to save the world, but if you can just reach one person, that is more than enough, but not losing yourself as you're pouring out. And so really being able to find space and time for who you are as a person and what your purpose is. It doesn't have to be a full hour. It can be 30 minutes, 15 minutes, but just, again, separating that technology and just recognizing, who are you? What do you do? What do you like? What don't you like? And then being able to pour out into the world from there.
Excellent. Awesome. So I just want to thank all the panelists. I want to let Gabriela know. Gabriela Martinez, I got your question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to forward that over to Greg because I believe, because it's a question dealing with working with junior and high school students in a community setting, community center setting, preparing them for college. So I think I'll send it to all 4 of you. And if any of you guys can answer that question, feel free to. But I don't think we have enough time to really get into that, or it may be better for one of you all to specifically answer or to have a back and forth with her about that question. So yeah, I just want to thank Greg, John, Osiris, and Christina for being here for this panel discussion. I want to thank Lainey for asking those great questions. So thank you so much. I hope your questions were answered well. If Lainey or any of the other young people want to follow up with any of the therapists, all the information is in the comments. This room will be open for a little bit longer if you want to take those things down while we're still going. And I also want to thank Mount Sinai Hospital and the Sinai Health System for sponsoring this event. And yeah, I really appreciate it. So I want to thank you all so much. This was so great. We hope to be having these panels regularly for young people who are here and other practitioners, people in the community. So look out for some of these panels coming at least on a quarterly basis, maybe on a semi-annual basis, but we hope to be having these coming soon, okay? So thank you everybody again, and everybody have a wonderful and blessed day. Thank you.